France too wants peace. The Europeans want peace. The United States of America want peace. As such, Ukraine has a fundamental right, that is to live in security and to no longer fear that Russia will attack once more. It is for this reason France, with the United Kingdom, built a coalition of the willing, bringing together 35 nations to give Ukraine crucial security guarantees for the long term. As such, we're creating the conditions for a robust, just peace which will allow the Ukrainian people to really be masters of their own fate. And what happened in recent weeks in Poland's airspace, Mr. President, Romania, the provocations that we saw in Estonia and elsewhere are the proof that all European people are also challenged by threats of Russian destabilization. And unity can thwart those. Ukraine has often said it's ready for a ceasefire and can agree to negotiations. It accepts them. It's now up to Russia to prove that it can choose peace, even at a time it's stepping up attacks against Ukrainian civilians and the provocations to which I've just referred. France is ready as we wait to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine alongside our European partners and all those that understand that we need to hold Russia back to preserve the global order. And I welcome the proposal we saw a few hours ago from the President of the United States, recalling the gradual weakening of the Russian economy. I welcome what he said, the on-the-ground failures of Russia. In more than 1,000 days, Russia's hardly gained 1% of Ukrainian territory. There have been so much loss, so many civilian victims, and few territorial gains. I welcome the fact that the President of the USA believes in Ukraine's ability not only to hold the course, but to uphold and ensure its rights prevail with us. It's because there is this refusal of double standards that France will stand side by side with Ukraine as we do for peace in the Middle East. Yesterday, we adopted a credible plan to put an end to the war in Gaza, to preserve a two-state solution, Israel and Palestine, to allow the release of all hostages and to save so many lives. We've charted a course towards peace, which requires first and foremost that hostages still in Hamas's hands are released, that strikes on Gaza cease. And I am delighted that Saudi Arabia and France have convinced a large number of the members of this assembly to sign the New York Declaration. 142 members of this assembly have signed that declaration. We've held out our hands to forge the path towards peace, immediate peace, release of hostages, ceasefire, stabilization of Gaza, the demilitarization and the dismantling of Hamas, and a reciprocal recognition of two states and a Palestinian state which is demilitarized, which recognizes Israel, an Israeli state which recognizes the state of Palestine, and all the states of the region that have not yet done so, we hope will recognize the state of Israel. Through this mutual recognition, that is in fact a path towards peace. It's also the stability of the region as a whole that we seek to build. There cannot be any security or stability for Israel if we have a permanent war being waged with its neighbours. Peace with Palestine, in the West Bank and in Gaza, and throughout Jerusalem. Peace in Lebanon. There, the struggle against terrorism cannot be waged to the detriment of sovereignty of the Lebanese people. And it's for that reason I am delighted at the work that we have undertaken hand in hand with the United States of America, with the United Nations and UNIFIL to build this path that will make it possible to restore Lebanese sovereignty, to make the Lebanese armed forces once again able, with UNIFIL, to really anchor their sovereignty and to build this monopoly over weapons, a monopoly that can only be held by the Lebanese armed forces. Lebanon breathes easier when Hezbollah is weaker, and the rest of Lebanon will breathe even better when all of armed caches, when all of the arms held by Hezbollah are back in the hands of the Lebanese armed forces. There's no other choice. We'll soon hold a support conference for the reconstruction of Lebanon. And we'll also support the conference that our Saudi friends will hold, supporting the Lebanese armed forces. In the same vein, Syria must recover its unity and its sovereignty. Syria is freer since Assad's regime fell. I received the transitional president in Paris. I welcomed him there. I'll see him again tomorrow. And with several states of the region, we are striving so that Syria can respect all components of its civil society, because that's where its strength lies. At the same time, it's in finding that unity once more, they will be able to also fully recover their sovereignty. The region can only be in peace if the Iranian nuclear program that has been partially destroyed is once again fully under control. It is for this reason France, Germany, the United Kingdom triggered by way of a collective agreement a process leading to the restoration of all international sanctions previously imposed upon Iran. Iran alone is responsible for being in breach of its obligations, but they have decided to open the doors to the IAEA and allow them to inspect HEU stocks and to conduct inspections. The next steps to come will be decisive. Either Iran makes a gesture and goes back to the path of peace and accountability that make it possible to get back on course and for the IAEA to do its work and for stockpiles to be transferred, or sanctions will have to be imposed. I'll have an occasion to meet with the president, if needs be, tomorrow. On each of these crucial issues, France puts forward concrete proposals, solutions. The plan for the war to stop in Ukraine exists. The plan to make peace in the Middle East is on the table. A plan to put the Iranian nuclear program back under proper control exists. The plan to restore the full sovereignty of Lebanon in the south exists. We always want to be the partner of all of those who share this demand that everyone take effective action. However, there is a risk that we will stop taking action and look away from too much suffering. The humanitarian tragedy currently in Sudan is undoubtedly the biggest of those facing us today. It's up to us collectively to rally, to mobilize as we did in Paris in 2024. Let us coordinate our efforts to act together so that the warmongers accept negotiations and put power back in civilian hands. In the same way, in the Great Lakes region, the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Democratic Republic of the Congo must be upheld. We need to return hope to the people of Kivu and to the hundreds of thousands of people that have been displaced. And it is also for that reason and it's also for that reason that we will meet next month in Paris, all of those able to respond to the humanitarian urgency and bring together initiatives of peace. And I'm delighted at what's been done by the African Union, by so many neighbors, Qatar, USA, but the humanitarian emergency needs to be addressed. We cannot forget any of these conflicts. We have no right at any time to lose heart. This capacity to take a leap of action is our source of strength. That's what brought us together 80 years ago. We have no right to get tired, to show fatigue. Well, there are so many crises, one after the other. I'm quite clear-sighted alongside you when I look at today's world. Everywhere we see the risks of proliferation once again return and new threats emerge. There is an urgent need to rebuild a credible framework, a verifiable framework to combat any nuclear proliferation, to rebuild a credible framework to once again contain these threats, ballistic proliferation. I'm not forgetting bacteriological, chemical threats or the new risks that posed by AI, cyber technology, space technology, quantum technology. We have common frameworks, but they've been weakened in all of these domains in recent years. Sometimes because some people sort of said they were outdated, and sometimes because the rules for verification weren't properly observed, sometimes because the pace of technological development meant that these frameworks, their capacity to innovate, was not enough. Technological change was going too quick. However, we've got no right to give up. We have to build that crucial framework for peace. The same demand for effectiveness, effective multilateralism is one that we need to uphold for our global challenges. The Secretary General attaches great importance to our organisation, and he has ambition for it, and that's shown through his initiative UN80, and I share his concerns about our organisation. Yes, we need, at this time of disarray that I talked about as a result of these major issues of war and conflict, we can't forget there are so many global challenges that mean that we must all come together. Let us stare straight in the face global imbalances. All economies affected. All economies, and I'm speaking as one of the richest among them, but also middle-income countries, developing countries, and of course the poorest nations among us. All of us, if we can't have organised international debate on major global imbalances, if our response is a fragmented one and we don't work together, we exacerbate these problems. Today, our challenge is to look at how we can help China to develop the internal demand that it really needs. How can we ensure that productive capacities that China's been able to develop in recent years, these technological capacity, sometimes there's technological transfer and that's good, but they need to be conducted hand in hand with harmonious development and respectfully the environment. How can we correct US trade imbalances? How can we do that through corrective measures, not through tariffs that takes the rug out from under international trade? There's Europe that needs to respond to collective needs for collective investment, and we need to shoulder that responsibility. These challenges mean that we need to cooperate. There needs to be cooperation between major economies, but we can't pit the G7 against the BRICS. And that's the very rationale behind our agenda for the French G7 of 2026. Of course, we'll work with the Canadian presidency of G7 and the coming presidents of G20. We need to return to that spirit of cooperation that is vital, because that's what will allow us also to have a common agenda to finance our global challenges. Let's take a look at things today. Everywhere we're eroding our common ambitions to finance major global challenges. Collective financing for healthcare is plummeting, as is financing for food security, as is financing for education. These challenges are, however, our challenges, even more than they were before the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. And so it is absolutely pivotal that together we prove ourselves able to develop concrete solutions and find new financing to address our challenges. The European Union decided to mobilize. The Commission's President's speech was great in this connection. We are mobilizing financing as Europeans to meet these challenges, but we must do so within a renewed framework. That's what we tried to do together during the pandemic itself with our African partners, during the financing summit which we held in 2021. The work we did there was work we continued at the 4P summit, where we developed this pact for the prosperity of peoples and the planet. Ultimately, the agendas were the same. Together, we need to work together better to address global economic imbalances. We must develop an agenda of growth everywhere, but we must do that to also help countries to finance education, healthcare, stabilization and food security, and help them to address challenges of biodiversity and the climate. Let us come off the horns of a dilemma. We don't need to choose between growth, climate change and biodiversity. We can do everything if we mobilize private and public financing within a framework that brings together, reconciles east, west, north and south. That's the framework we've built. And now what we need to do is expedite the transition that's already underway. And I thank you all. The heads of the World Bank, the IMF, have commented on these efforts, but we need to go faster. The frameworks we developed have already become obsolete. We need to mobilize more private financing to accompany transitions in middle-income countries, developing countries and the poorest nations. We must develop guarantee mechanisms that losses will be covered, and we need to mobilize more private financing to help those countries and help them to grow. That is vital if we want to avoid crises, destabilization tomorrow. This agenda is an agenda which brings us together. and in some way forces some people to cast aside selfishness and avoid a situation whereby others are alone facing their challenges. It is for that reason we must also continue. Whatever the ill winds that blow, continue to mobilize to stop biodiversity loss and help the climate. As I was saying, together we were able to notch up victories recently. The Nice Treaty that entered into force through collective rallying. We finally have a regulation framework for our oceans. That was something we'd been waiting for decades. The same collective mobilization is what we must see on plastic. We need to develop an international treaty that aims to put an end to plastic pollution. The same mobilization is what we need to have to mobilize biodiversity credits and give more consistency to our carbon credits. This same rallying needs to be seen as we move towards the Berlin COP. France and Europe will be at that meeting, and we will be in step with the 2030 goals. We will mobilize all financing necessary to usher in this transition, whether that be public or private financing. We have no right to turn away, stray from the course towards the goals we set ourselves. We have no right to simply crumble and become isolated. As you've seen, all of these global challenges, education, healthcare, agriculture, food security, biodiversity, climate, the fight ultimately against all inequalities that destabilize our global order require the same spirit of cooperation, the same spirit that I talked about, the spirit we showed in the face of war and destabilization. Our challenge is the fact that crises, there's a plethora of them, they're growing in number. My speech was long and quite comprehensive, but I do reassure you I'm coming to an end. But I forcefully say to you once more, in spite of all that, in spite of the long list that sometimes gives the impression that we might be overwhelmed, our duty is to remain on our feet and to continue to act together. 80 years ago, those that preceded us were facing collapse. The war hadn't finished. The worst had just come to pass. A world already divided was kind of stuttering, and it was up to them to build the treasure that is the United Nations. We could overwhelm our assembly, level criticism against it, reproach it for everything. Not all reproaches are fair, some are. This assembly is us. If it's ineffective, it's because some people are blocking it. And sometimes it's the most powerful. If it's not going fast enough, it's because people don't have enough resolve to make things move forward. The United Nations is all of us. There's one thing. It's that we don't have a right to be cynical. We don't have the right to get fatigued. We can't have this defeated heart, because our world is here before us, and our risk, the risk that we face, is that of fragmentation, that the law might is right will prevail, the status quo prevailing, cynicism, and to some extent that we will lose control. Yes, the loss of control. That's what all of our peoples are experiencing. Fear in the face of a future they no longer control. The fear before in the face of migrations that they're weathering, a climate that we can no longer control, fear of inequalities that we can't bring under control, a fear in the face of a war we can't stop. This fear has one friend, the strongest friend, the mightiest person that was able to prevail, the cynic that was allowed to prevail. We have one responsibility, that is to act together, build this multilateralism once again with the same faith, with the same resolve as the founding fathers of this assembly. We need to do that with even more effectiveness, but with the same will. We cannot give ground to injustice. We can give nothing to fatality or the sense of the inevitable. We need to act, act, and act. So it's up to us to do just that together. I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the French Republic. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Sadra Shadia Zaparov, President of the Kyrgyz Republic. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Madam President, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished heads of delegations, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to sincerely congratulate Ms. Annalena Baerbock on her election as the President of the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly and to wish her every success in her work. This year, we mark the 80th anniversary of the UN, a unique institution that has stood guard over peace, security, and development for nearly a century. Over these 80 years, despite numerous conflicts, the world has fortunately been spared the outbreak of a third world war. The United Nations has undoubtedly played a key role in this achievement. The organization has become not only an international platform for dialogue, but also played a special role in preventing global conflicts. Today, the trend of regionalism in world politics is strengthening. We are witnessing continued price hikes, a shortage of liquidity, and a war of sanctions in the global economy. The threat of terrorism and extremism has spread across all countries. Despite criticism, the UN remains the only truly universal organization endowed with both moral authority and institutional capacity. Today, Kyrgyzstan takes pride in the political stability it has achieved and in the ongoing social and economic transformation. These achievements did not come easily to us. For us, the price of attaining freedom and independence was very high. But I can state one thing with confidence. We have been able to establish Kyrgyzstan as a state. This achievement allows us to set ambitious goals for the future. International organizations, including the UN, recognize Kyrgyzstan as one of the freest and most stable states on the Eurasian continent with a strong civil society. A large-scale and irreversible fight against corruption and crime is considered a priority area of state policy in Kyrgyzstan. Today, our task is to pursue political modernization and economic development in line with the demands of tomorrow. We are committed to improving the investment climate, building an information society, and establishing fair and transparent public governance. Ladies and gentlemen, every year in New York, leaders of all world's nations gather to once again remind themselves and each other of the great mission for which UN was created. I too have come to New York with this mission. Today, my diplomatic staff have prepared a polite text that takes into account the international diplomatic situation. However, this year, standing at this high podium, I decided not to speak as a diplomat. This year, from this podium, I wish to speak not only as the head of state, but as an ordinary person and a citizen of my country, openly expressing my true thoughts and reflections on the international events happening in the world. This year marks the 4th time I am delivering a speech at the UN General Assembly. For 3 consecutive years, I came here and delivered pleasant, beautiful words. But today, I have decided to speak openly and directly about the problems that trouble the hearts of millions of people. In different parts of the world, in Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia, new armed conflicts and wars are erupting. Millions of people losing their homes are forced to abandon their native lands, and millions become victims. Who suffers the most? First and foremost, ordinary people. We cannot turn a blind eye to the suffering of many peoples. Palestine, Ukraine, Sudan, Syria, and others where hostilities continue. Civilians are dying and human rights are being violated. The world community, applying double standards, prioritizes these conflicts as more or less important, depending on its own geopolitical interests. The conflict in Ukraine has lasted nearly 4 years, with people continuing to die and flee their country. We support the efforts of US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin to seek solutions for a peaceful settlement of conflict in Ukraine. We are interested in this outcome because we too are suffering from the consequences of Russian-Ukraine conflict. Unilateral sanctions negatively affect us as well, a country that is only just getting back on its feet. Kyrgyzstan is making every effort to strengthen its economy independently. Therefore, we view unjustified sanctions as interference in our internal affairs and as pressure that hinders the development of our still-forming economy. I have always said, I will say again, Kyrgyzstan has strictly fulfilled and will continue to fulfill its international obligations. However, we cannot sacrifice the interests of our citizens and the economic development of our country. The sanctions imposed on Kyrgyzstan are based on false information spread by certain non-governmental organizations and dishonest people. We are ready to accept independent international audits to thoroughly review the activities of Kyrgyzstan's banks. In 2024, EU countries traded with Russia to the amount of $141 billion, of which $36 billion was Russian imports. and the UK, which imposed sanctions on 2 of our banks the same year, traded with Russia for $2.2 billion. Frankly speaking, some keep the option of cooperating with Russia in defense of their own interest, but forbid others from doing the same. How should this phenomenon be called? Before demanding something from others, be an example to yourself. You demand from us not to cooperate with Russia, yet you yourselves are cooperating extensively. We, in fact, have far deeper economic relations with Russia than you do. Therefore, economically speaking, we cannot refuse cooperation with Russia. We do not seek confrontation with others. We cooperate with virtually the entire world, pursuing a multi-vector foreign policy. For example, every year we sell gold worth of $1 billion to the UK alone. My foremost duty as the president of the country is to ensure the security of my citizens and my nation, and to improve their economic well-being. We oppose the politicization of economic cooperation and trade. Therefore, we demand the lifting of sanctions against 2 of our banks. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the UN Secretary General has already described the Gaza Strip as a graveyard of thousands of children. More is needed to stop the war and the horrific events in Gaza. We must empathize with Palestinian people who have suffered enormous losses as a result of inhuman conflict in the Gaza Strip. We must not remain indifferent to the human tragedy unfolding before the whole world. We demand an end to genocide against the Palestinians and the commencement of international judicial investigation by the UN International Court of Justice. My country has always firmly condemned violence and terrorism in all their forms, including the terrorist attacks on Israel on the 7th of October 2023. Such terrorists must be punished harshly. However, the fight against terrorism and the methods used to eliminate terrorists have their own rules and procedures. Those methods must be used. Because of actions of such terrorists, millions of ordinary civilians should not perish. Why do we allow the mass deaths of ordinary people and innocent children by the hundreds of thousands? The only way to establish a lasting peace is to implement the principle of two states for two people. Palestine must gain independence based on 1967 borders. We also condemn the recent rocket strikes on the territories of Qatar and Iran, since such attacks infringe on the sovereignty of independent states, create threats to regional stability and security, and run counter to the norms of international law. The fight against terrorism and modern threats in Gaza, Iran, Lebanon, and other regions must be proportionate to their scale and nature. Civilians, women, and children must not suffer and be sacrificed. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as a neighboring country, Kyrgyzstan considers it important, especially in these difficult times, to provide comprehensive support to the Afghan people by integrating Afghanistan's economy into the regional and global economic processes. To isolate Afghanistan at the international level and deprive it of foreign assistance is wrong. It is unjust. We believe that the use of financial instruments for geopolitical and ideological gain, thereby deepening the humanitarian crisis, is an act of injustice and inhumanity. Therefore, we are convinced that the assets of Afghanistan frozen by Western countries in the amount of $9 billion must be returned to the Afghan people as soon as possible. These funds could contribute to the restoration of infrastructure, expansion of access to credit through local banks, the development of agriculture, and the creation of new opportunities for millions of people living in poverty. According to the UN data, in 2025, 15 million people in Afghanistan faced hunger and 24 million required humanitarian assistance. As we all know, at the beginning of September, more than 2,000 of our Afghan brothers lost their lives as a result of an earthquake. Tragically, due to lack of financial resources and weak infrastructure, timely assistance could not be provided to those affected. We call upon the leaders of Western countries to immediately return these assets for the sake of future of the Afghan people. If you truly want the Afghan people to overcome poverty, hunger, as soon as possible, return them without delay. Only then will your words about human rights and interstate obligations correspond to your actions. Distinguished participants, today's challenges in African countries, from conflicts to food insecurity, require not sympathy in words, but solidarity in action. Africa is 54 countries with a population of more than 1.5 billion people. It is the second largest continent after Eurasia. Africa possesses enormous reserves of resources, and we are confident that in the near future Africa's role in the global economy and international politics will multiply several times. Therefore, the continent's colossal natural wealth must serve the accelerated development of Africa itself and the fulfillment of its own interests. The peacekeeping work of the UN must be strengthened. My country began sending its peacekeepers on UN missions at the dawn of its independence in the early 1990s. This once again proves that we are sincerely wish to contribute to the cause of strengthening peace and security in the world. The contribution of a state should not be determined by its size, but by the depth of its commitment and sincere desire for peace and solidarity. We support the strengthening of international treaties, including the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. It is important to educate the younger generation to perceive a world without nuclear weapons. It is essential to raise awareness among young people about the devastating consequences of weapons of mass destruction. The International Day for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation Awareness, initiated by Kyrgyzstan and supported by the UN member states, is an excellent platform for implementing this concept. Kyrgyzstan is one of the initiators and the depository of Treaty on Nuclear Weapon-Free Zones in Central Asia. We have acceded to all fundamental international instruments on disarmament and non-proliferation, including the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. In line with the principles of consistency, this year the Kyrgyz Republic made the political decision to sign the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We firmly believe that our planet must exist without nuclear weapons. This human invention must be used solely for peaceful purposes. Ladies and gentlemen, for sustainable development and regional integration, the countries of Central Asia require equal dialogue and active cooperation. Despite complex historical and geographic factors, Kyrgyzstan has peacefully resolved its border issues with neighboring countries, in particular Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. This process involved lengthy negotiations and at high political levels, expert levels, and was resolved with due respect for the interests of all sides. I can state with confidence that today the borders between Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan are borders of friendship, trade, and cooperation. This experience confirms that peace is possible where there is political will, respect, and dialogue, which enabled us to resolve existing contradictions and embark on a path of creation and development. Kyrgyzstan is ready to share this experience of resolving complex issues with the international community. Let us use the more than $3 trillion that are spent annually on armaments worldwide to improve people's lives, eradicate hunger, protect our environment, and clean the air. After all, there are no borders when it comes to breathing air. We all breathe the same air. Therefore, I call on us to live not in a race for who has the most powerful weapons, but in a competition for whose country has the cleanest nature and air. Dear friends, climate change is a reality we are witnessing today. We face threats of drought, melting glaciers, changes in ecosystems, and loss of biodiversity. Kyrgyzstan, as a mountainous country, is particularly vulnerable to these changes. We are already experiencing the threat of declining water resources and risks to agriculture and biodiversity. Although Kyrgyzstan is landlocked, it actively participates in international environmental initiatives and can play a significant role in supporting agreements aimed at protecting global ecosystems. The Kyrgyz Republic consistently advocates for recognition of the interconnection of natural systems from mountains to oceans, which are two poles of a single system. The future of the oceans begin on the mountaintops. In this context, we ratified the agreement on conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity and became among the first 60+ countries to join the agreement. Rivers that sustain marine and coastal ecosystems originate in mountains. Thus, the protection of mountain ecosystems and the sustainable management of the oceans are interconnected. At present, the country is preparing the second Bishkek Plus 25 summit, scheduled for 2027, as a central platform for states, international organizations, and experts on sustainable development of mountain regions. We invite all of you to take an active part in this event. Dear friends, as former UN General Secretary Dag Hammarskjöld once aptly said, the UN was not created to lead humanity to heaven, but to save humanity from hell. Today these words are more relevant than ever. The organization was born from the horrors of war, but lives and on thanks to faith in cooperation, dialogue and respect. Now more than ever, it is important to preserve and strengthen the system of multilateralism as a shield against anarchy and unilateral decisions. There is an urgent need to develop fundamentally new international mechanisms that adequately respond to contemporary challenges and threats. Our organization needs to change. This is no longer a choice, but a requirement of time and today's realities. In this context, we support the effort of the Secretary General to reform the UN under the initiative UN 80. It is also time to improve the reform work of the UN Security Council. At present, 50 members of the Security Council effectively decide the fate of all world's states. Questions of war and peace, security and stability depend on whether they can reach a consolidated position. Moreover, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council can always block any decision. Kyrgyzstan advocates for a necessary measure to improve the UN Security Council in a way that takes into account the interest of majority of states. In this regard, it is important to achieve a compromise on all aspects of Security Council reform as soon as possible. This reform must be based on principles of universality, broad geographical representation, and wide support among UN member states. Kyrgyzstan considers it legitimate and fair to expand the rights of African states to membership in the Security Council and to eliminate historical imbalances. More than 60 member states, including Kyrgyzstan, have never been elected to the Security Council, while some countries have been elected 5 or 6 times. We think it's not fair. Distinguished delegates, Kyrgyzstan strives to make its contribution to peace, global security, and sustainable development. In order to draw the attention of the UN and the world to the challenges faced by small states, Kyrgyzstan has put forward its candidacy for non-permanent membership in the UN Security Council for the period 2027-2028. The support of countries that have never been elected to this Security Council will strengthen confidence in equality among members and thereby raise the authority of organization and reinforce trust in it. We sincerely believe in the principle of justice, and I ask UN member states to support us in the elections in June next year. Every country should have the opportunity to serve as a member of the Council and contribute to the cause of maintaining peace and security. I can confidently say that Kyrgyzstan is among those states with the experience needed to raise meaningful issues in the Security Council. We will firmly uphold international law, justice, the protection of human rights, and support the multilateral system based on mutual respect, balance of interest, and responsibility to future generations. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, our challenges are shared, and our responses must be united. Our words must match our deeds. We cannot afford inaction. Peace requires effort. The future of our planet is in our shared responsibility. Thank you very much for your attention.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Kyrgyz Republic. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Gustavo Petro Orrego, President of the Republic of Colombia. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
President of the General Assembly, this is my last statement as President here. It's the fourth time. In my first speech, I announced that it was very likely that there would be conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza and in Palestine, and that I suggested that there be a peace conference, but those who don't have bombs or large budgets are not heated here. Well, 4 years later, the horrific situation in Palestine did not lead me to think that almost the same thing could happen in the Colombian Caribbean area, where unarmed young people are being shot at with missiles in the open seas. And now we are in a different situation. Perhaps it's more global, a kind of Stone Age that has descended on all of humankind. Missiles against 17 unarmed young people in the Caribbean Sea, some of them Colombians. The persecution, imprisonment, and expulsion of millions of migrants, missiles that have killed some 70,000 people in Gaza, the lack of action on the climate crisis. All this is linked, and all this has the same cause. Migration is simply an excuse so that a rich society, rich, white, and racist, believes itself to be the superior race and is not realizing that its leaders are leading it to the abyss, to its own distinction, together with the rest of humanity. They said that the missiles in the Caribbean were used to stop drug trafficking. That is a lie. Stated here in this very rostrum. In 2023 and 2024 were years when the largest amount of cocaine was seized, and over 700 drug traffickers were extradited to the United States in Europe. I extradited them, and my government seized, confiscated the cocaine, and we didn't shoot a single missile, nor did we kill any youths. The years where I was able to prove that it's more effective to substitute coca crops than eradicate them, than forced eradication using poison, and forcing peasants to use it. The violent war against drugs was a failure, and I replaced it with an effective anti-trafficking policy, not based on a mix-up between an inert substance, that is drugs, with people who actually use it and practice it. But what was necessary is to destroy dialogue and to shoot missiles. Was it really necessary on unarmed, poor young people in the Caribbean? The anti-drug policy is not meant to stop cocaine that is coming to the United States. The anti-drug policy is to dominate the peoples of the South as a whole. You shouldn't look at the drugs, you should look at who has the power and who dominates. This is why I speak to you as a decertified president. I've been decertified by President Trump, without him having any right to do this, a human right or divine right or any sensible reason. They want to force by violence tens of thousands of peasants to do what the U.S. government wants to do, which are influenced by mafia groups in Colombia. Thousands of peasants are massacred in Colombia by politicians who were senators, who were presidents, who were ministers that were bribed and on the payroll of the drug mafia. And at the same time, they were allies of the extreme right based in Florida of the United States, and now allies of the Trump administration. They've been allied for decades with drug lords, cocaine drug lords in Colombia. They were allies, and so they led this anti-drug policy from Washington. I don't know if Trump even knows that that his foreign policy towards Colombia, Venezuela, and towards the Caribbean is based on advice from Colombians who are allies of the cocaine mafia. I myself denounced these politicians, including the paramilitaries, drug traffickers, naming them by their names in the Congress of Colombia when I was senator, and many times they wanted to kill me because of that. And they did not want me to become president. They wanted me to shut up, and now they don't want another progressive government to be reelected. That is why I've been personally decertified, and they have spread calumny against Colombia. Colombia has confiscated the highest amount of cocaine in the history of the country under my government, and I've been decertified. In Colombia, we have managed to stop the increase in the rate of expansion of coca crops that was 43% under the government of Duque, and has dropped to 3%. And Duque was not decertified. He was who had someone who financed his campaign, who was a drug trafficker, and instead they've decertified me. So the anti-drug policy is not aimed at the public health of a society, but rather to prop up a policy of domination. They don't want to give the power to the people. The young people that were killed using missiles in the Caribbean were not from Hamas. They were not from other terrorist groups. They were poor Colombians. And with apologies to those who dominate the United Nations, there should be criminal cases against those officials of the United States for doing this, including the utmost official, President Trump, that allowed the shooting of missiles against these young people who were simply trying to escape poverty. Youths who in a speedboat who might have had a certain amount of drugs were not drug traffickers. They were simply poor youth. But the real drug traffickers live somewhere else, not in America, not in Latin America. So it's easy to shoot missiles against the speedboats with migrants and accusing them of terrorism and drug trafficking when they don't have a single weapon to defend themselves. When the real drug traffickers live in New York, here, just a few blocks from here, in Miami. And they reach agreements with the DEA, and they're allowed to traffic in Africa, in Russia, in China, but not in the United States, a country that has not managed to reduce its consumption of cocaine, because it's drug addicts, or rather they did manage to reduce the consumption of cocaine simply because their addicts switched to another type of drug, fentanyl. which is much deadlier. This fentanyl is produced in the industrial heartland of the United States, here, not far from here. And the consumers are here as well. It's produced and consumed in the United States. That is the worst. They're addicted to fentanyl and to gasoline, the two main poisons of life in the world. And gasoline is even worse than fentanyl. Only the black-skinned people here, those who are ancestral here, that were thousands of years have been here, or young people, or women who don't want to see their children die of any color of their skin. People are still hooked on fentanyl or hooked on television. Only they can stop this domination by the United States. The people who have taken to the streets in California, in New York, in Philadelphia, where the Liberty Bell stands, in spite of the National Guard that Trump sends out against its own people to shut them up, to the states that are free. These states are no longer uniting their efforts in the face of tyranny. The President of the United States does not know that 1 million Latin Americans have died. The largest share of them from Colombia. And another 1 million will die in North America in 10 years because of fentanyl. Cocaine killed 3,000 people a year. Today, fentanyl kills 130 per year, 30 times more. That is the outcome of 30 years by the United States of a policy that is absurd and that is leading its society to the horrific death due to drugs that kill the brain. And in this situation, Trump not only allows missiles to be fired at young people in the Caribbean, does not only imprison migrants, but also allows missiles to be killed against children, women, and old people in Gaza. He is an accomplice to genocide. It is a genocide, and we need to prevent it. This forum is a mute witness to a genocide. In a world where we thought that this was something only a legacy of Hitler. Here they don't speak of life, of the climate crisis. What is happening is the death of thousands of children. Meanwhile, we in Colombia have not increased the rate of killings. We have the lowest unemployment rate in the country this century. We have the lowest unemployment rates. We have developed our agriculture by 10% and our industry by 5%. We have more tourists than ever who have come to see the beauties of our country, our cultural and natural beauties. And we are seeking peace by negotiating with drug traffickers and with rebels. I will always be ready to discuss, to negotiate, to save lives, and to eradicate coca crops, but based on their own voluntary decision by Colombian peasants. Let us not be bribed by the drug traffickers, as was the case in previous governments in Colombia. And 25,000 hectares have already been eradicated voluntarily. We have been successful in this new policy. It's not an anti-drug policy, but an anti-drug traffickers policy. That is something different. And we're grateful to the countries that have helped us. such as Qatar, Cuba, Mexico, Vatican, Norway, Brazil, and Venezuela. We don't want to thank those who want to sow war between us. People of the world, listen. Latin America does not only mean drug trafficking or coke or cocaine. Latin America has a massive, massive potential for clean electrical energy, renewable alternate energy based on wind, water. The United States has a huge demand for energy, and 70% of it is filled by fossil fuels, in other words, based on carbon, coal, gas. Latin America is developing its clean energy potential, and we can satisfy the entire demand of the United States for energy. What is necessary is investment, and we would make the biggest contribution to fighting climate change. Given the huge potential for clean energy and the capacity to absorb by the Amazon, Latin America can make a tremendous contribution to save the life in this planet. All that is necessary is $600 billion to develop this potential. Africa and Europe can do the same. It is this decarbonization would provide us with over $1.3 trillion. This is money that is already in the treasuries of the United States, Europe, and China, but not a dollar is spent because it's not profitable. Or rather, it might be profitable in terms of human life, including life in the United States, in Europe, and China. However, they don't want to depend on Latin America and Africa. They know that to bring together the clean energy of Africa and Latin America would not only decarbonize the planet, save it from the climate collapse, but it would also change the global power of which is discussed here. But that power is spoken in terms of bombs. But this would truly create a global democracy and change the means of production, because life and humanity would become the priorities, and they would edge out greed. Greed is the poison of life, and Mao spoke of this. Chairman Mao. According to science, we have 10 more years until we reach a point of no return in terms of the climate. And once we reach that point, we won't be able to do anything. We will simply observe the disasters, and we'll feel them in our own families and cities. Because it will be irreversible. The extinction of life, extinction of human life there'll be an irreversibility of the process, and no technology, no political or social force will be able to do anything about it to stop this collapse. And we only have 10 years left. That is what science tells us. But here people don't believe in science. The most powerful man in the world does not believe in science. That is the irrationality. And Germany, the country of great philosophers, of Kant, Feuerbach, and others, was became prey of irrationalism in 1933, and today it's this country that is becoming irrational. The solution is to stop consuming fossil fuels and to quickly switch to water, wind, hydrogen. But the word decarbonization sounds subversive at the conferences of the most powerful countries, the G7 or G20 or Davos, among the rich. Just as 5 centuries ago, the word democracy sounded subversive here, or in Bogota, and in Paris, and in Madrid. These dollars that I mentioned here, 600 billion or 1.3 trillion. This is significant. This is just a little more than what the rich countries pledged at the COP in Paris, and they have not fulfilled their pledges because they are not interested in decarbonization. And what has come is basically loans from multilateral banks, which are just small amounts compared to what is needed. The climate crisis means that in all public budgets, investment in decarbonization and adaptation should be the priority. A global financial policy is necessary that is different. The debt risk premium should be abolished. Which countries are the riskiest? They are the countries that have the highest greenhouse gas emissions, such as this one. These are the riskiest countries. Whereas the countries that absorb CO2, and we have jungles and a lot of water in the south, we absorb the CO2 of the north. But the market does not agree with that. So the debt of the poorest countries must be forgiven. There should be swaps, debt swaps for adaptation and mitigation and investment in the climate crisis. So people from the United States and those from Wall Street, from London, you want to collect the interest payments from the debt of our countries. What you will find eventually is cemeteries, because we'll all be dead. The money will be useless in the midst of all the cemeteries. Another subversive word is to plan. A global plan. The word plan has been forgotten because it was not necessary to plan, because to plan is anathema. And there was a fundamentalist belief in the markets, thinking that markets would bring happiness. A Swiss economist, Arras, said this. And in fact, the market leads to an abyss. It leads to death, as we are already witnessing today. Malras, that was his name, was wrong. Neoliberalism was mistaken from the very beginning, and it's been guiding our countries for the past 50 years based on completely erroneous formulas. The plans should be binding on national states. There should be a global democracy supervised by a Security Council that does not have the right to veto. Because We have to understand that the market will not resolve the climate crisis because it has produced that crisis. It was capital, which is based on unequal relationship between those who own the means that create the carbon and those who work, who are salaried employees. And this is a system that has to produce more and more objects that the boss, the owner, has to sell. And the same thing for the production of fossil fuels. That is what has produced the climate crisis. Produce more, to consume more, to sell more, and thus create more carbon, more oil until we die. But this will not last forever because carbon and fossil fuels have reached the end, because that is perhaps will mean the end of capital in general, because if it's not the end of capital, it'll be the end of life. The owner of capital is an individual that has power. It's not a thing. It's not some kind of puppet. It is a human being with his greed, a slave to his greed. That is the individual who will seek to make sure that more and more oil is produced in their countries, even if it poisons his life, and continue to dig for more oil, even if it destroys the atmosphere and destroys life. So we have to choose either life or greed, either the Stone Age or local and global democracy, freedom or death, as Bolivar said. And that was his slogan, his red and black, white and white banner. Freedom red, death black, and possible peace white. That is what is necessary, is a revolution by the peoples of the world to overcome the climate crisis and not to allow this crisis to reach a global collapse. It is a revolution of the united peoples, of civilizations that need to engage in dialogue, more than states themselves. It is a revolution of entire humanity to save life on the planet, and perhaps with the cooperation of certain governments that want to support life. Today, the United Nations is experiencing a crisis, and there's a need to transform it. Today, we have nation states gathered here who no longer have power, and that no matter how much they vote, they are ignored, because the nation state has also reached its decadence, its ultimate fall. Because capital has become global. It's not contained in a state. Socialism was supposed to be global, but Stalin, in fact, in Yalta, condemned a global revolution that was occurring in Spain and in Greece, and it might have occurred in Latin America and other places. So humanity is a new political subject that has emerged rather than the nation state. And so the United Nations has to become a united humanity, even though a diverse but united humanity. A new subject is appearing in human history, and this is very important. And I think that this is wonderful, because we have to overcome the idea of a nation state to become humanity, but that humanity must be united. For that, there needs to be democracy around the world. There needs to be permanent dialogue in the midst of diversity. It is our differences that compels us to coordinate our action at the global level. Dialogue, yes. Humanity, yes. Humanity profoundly democratic, yes. Hopefully, a humanity of based on leaders who are free, rather than a humanity that is basically slaves, just to beasts of burden. A humanity that shoots missiles against young people that are defenseless armed people, or shoots missiles in a place of the world near where Jesus was born. These problems cannot be resolved with governments who are bribed by oil producers, by oil corporations. So a new political subject is emerging, a united and diverse humanity, united despite its diverse cultures. Meanwhile, the old societies of Europe are collapsing, and the United States is applauding its new Hitler. It's not listening to its own young people or its older people who died in Europe in the battlefields of Europe, fighting against Hitler and against his criminal ideology. Today, the same thing is being done as Hitler did, building concentration camps for migrants. It's stated that migrants are of an inferior race, and they blame them, just like Hitler blamed the Jews. They call them drug traffickers and thieves, whereas the majority of drug traffickers are blonde and have blue eyes, and they keep their fortunes in the largest banks in the world, and they don't live in Bogota or in Gaza. They live in Miami. They are neighbors of President Trump. They live in Dubai or in Paris or London. They don't live where there's poverty. But the missiles are fired against those where there's poverty. Tren de Aragua is a group that is considered a terrorist group, but that is not true. Migrants are not criminals. They should not be put in concentration camps, expelled and chained up. Immigration is not immigration is due to a blockade against countries like Iraq or Cuba. Immigration is a result of the impoverishment of many countries because of their indebtedness, because of wars unleashed by the United States and Europe to grab their oil. Immigration is a consequence of a climate crisis that leaves the tropics without water and destroys the environment. The solution to migration is very different from missiles or prisons or camps. There is no higher race. There's no supreme race. Only ignorant extremists think like that. All of humanity is made in God's image. They use immigration as a scapegoat to do nothing against the climate crisis, which will put an end to life. They use immigration to get the votes of the whites, but what is necessary is to put an end to the consumption of CO2 and oil, and stop drilling for oil. We need a different world, a humane world. And first and foremost, we need to stop the genocide in Gaza. Humanity cannot allow a single day more of this genocide, or for the genocidal Netanyahu and his allies in Europe and the United States to continue. The United Nations must uphold the decisions of the International Court of Justice. International law is the basis of civilization and of its wisdom as distilled in history, and it must make sure that the decisions of international justice are implemented, are applied. Diplomacy has been tried in Gaza. It could not resolve the situation. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, President Macron. We can keep insisting and insisting in when every single day, every single minute, a missile is fired and destroys the bodies of babies and children in the Arab state of Palestine. Every day, there are decisions, resolutions that are vetoed in the Security Council. Every day, more and more children die. More and more bombs, more and more dead. Perhaps those who do this, who shoot this, are robots. Maybe they don't have their own children. They're not human. Can we stop the genocide with a vote, the General Assembly? Yes, that's what we should do rather than a vote in the Security Council, because that is vetoed. United for peace for Palestine. We should establish a peacekeeping force to protect. What's necessary today are words, not blue helmets that are often lack training, and they're not ready to do this. No, what we need is a powerful army of countries that do not accept genocide. That is why I invite nations of the world and their peoples, most importantly, as a integral part of humanity, to bring together weapons and armies and to defend Palestine. I invite the armies of Asia and the brave people, the brave Slavic people who defeated Hitler, and the Latin American people of Bolivar, of Garibaldi, and others. I think there's enough. We've had enough words. Today, the time has come to use the slogan of Bolivar: "Freedom or death," because Washington and NATO are killing democracy, and they are spreading totalitarianism at the global level. We need to raise the red and black banner flag. Without forgetting the white color, which was the color of peace and the color of hope in the heart of humanity. The United States no longer teach democracy, but rather kill democracy, especially among its immigrants, filled with greed. The UN should begin its change by stopping the genocide in Gaza with a army of liberation and salvation, and there should be a decision here taken in the General Assembly without any veto. After Gaza, we can start working on decarbonization so that we can found a truly global democracy, and a new Security Council can be established without any vetoes, and where its decisions would be binding, and the global and national financial system should be based on decentralized capital. That is the way that humankind can regulate capital, to subordinate capital to life, to regulate it to people. That is the path by which the United Nations will move from an alliance of states to an alliance of cultures and peoples. If we overcome the climate crisis, and if we unite as humanity, we will managed to make the United Nations an assembly of peoples which seeks to make sure that every individual is free, making sure that every human being achieves their potential, and because the intelligence of human beings, illuminated by science, will make it possible to not only save life, but to fulfill the mission of humanity by expanding life into the stars. A humanity that is united and free can look at the stars and reach the stars, as the Romans, the legionnaires, thought of Judea when they used the word astra, or star. It's the time of freedom or death. A real death from missiles, but freedom is also real in the heart of human beings and its capacity to rebel and to resist. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Colombia. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Karol Nawrocki, President of the Republic of Poland. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, I like and appreciate a lot English language, but I love Polish language, which epitomizes more than 1,000 years of Polish heritage, Polish culture, and Polish history. So I would like to share with you Polish language. Szanowny
Distinguished Mr. President, Your Excellencies, esteemed delegates, I am standing here for the first time as President of the Republic of Poland. And of course, I feel great proud because of this. But at the same time, I'm aware of what serious challenges we are facing today as an international community. This is indeed so, for the world has changed completely over the last couple of years since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. On February the 24th, 2022, we were brutally, all of us, awakened from our blissful dream of a world at the end of history. The history did not finish, and the history will not finish, and we need to be aware of that. So we were awakened from our blissful dream in which we strive for universal peace and respect for the principles of international law. I believe these are the words which are repeated more frequently in this community.